feel like I've said this in every video, but Alan Wake is one of my favorite games of all time. When I think back on my first experiences with horror gaming, there are two games that come to mind: Slender the Eight Pages and Alan Wake. Slender was this huge in-your-face horror phenomenon, but Alan Wake is what showed me what horror games could be. It's not always about being scary, it can also be about telling a great story. And when you pair that great story with cinematic action, well, it feels like you're playing a movie. Alan Wake will always hold a special place in my heart, and with the upcoming release of Alan Wake Remastered, I think it's finally time that we delve into the darkness and look at what makes Alan Wake such a great game. Let's talk about it, starting off with a little bit of history. Alan Wake was created by Remedy Games, and it first released in May of 2010 for the Xbox 360. The game was a response to TV shows like Twin Peaks and The Twilight Zone. In fact, there are plenty of references to both in the game. Alan Wake is described by Remedy as the mind of a psychological thriller and the body of a cinematic horror game, which I think perfectly encapsulates the game. Now, if you don't know what a cinematic game is, I highly recommend checking out my video on Control, another Remedy game, where I dive into this idea a lot further. Overall, Alan Wake was a critical success, but it didn't do extremely well sales-wise at first. The game was released in the same week as Red Dead Redemption, so you can see the problems there. But over the following years, the game earned some traction, and it's reported to have sold over 3 million copies. Now, let's talk about the game's story. In Alan Wake, you play as, you guessed it, Alan Wake. The titular character is a writer and author of the world's famous Alex Casey series of crime novels. But right now, he's suffering from a bad case of writer's block. So, at the advice of his agent, Barry Wheeler, Alan and his wife take a vacation to the small town of Bright Falls. But following the disappearance of his wife, Alan must journey through the night to rescue her, all while the pages of his newest novel come to life right before his eyes. The game feels like a Stephen King story in video game form, so it's no wonder the game starts with a quote by him. It has all the great aspects of a horror story, which is extremely unique for a video game. Many horror games rely on visual mediums to drive the scariest parts of the game. I'm talking things like gruesome visuals and jump scares, but Alan Wake takes a story-first approach, which makes the fear feel more personal and less like it's just trying to scare you. The game often gets labeled as an action thriller, which isn't wrong, but I think to dismiss its horror elements and roots is just entirely wrong. The game just looks at the horror from a different angle. But of course, a game isn't really a game unless the gameplay parts can carry the story along. So let's talk about that. Alan Wake is a third-person action game, so you spend most of the time looking over his shoulder. This perspective helps to drive the narrative. Where first-person games can help you feel like you are the character, that isn't the game's goal. The goal is to tell Alan's story, so a third-person perspective helps drive that. The game is split up into episodes, each one featuring some different locations and different challenges to confront, the main one being the game's main enemies, the Taken, because zombies are cliché. The Taken are beings possessed by darkness and cloaked in shadows, so the only way to defeat them is to shine light on them, breaking their shield so you can blast them away with guns. The combat is also aided by the third-person view because it gives you time to prep and see what's coming, but also I honestly can't imagine how it would look trying to show this in first person. You'd have your hands covering like 70% of the screen at least, but seeing the whole screen is kind of important, so you can actually hit your target, but also because the game is absolutely gorgeous. Alan Wake's world design still holds up to this day. Each chapter features unique locations from forests and a city to abandoned mines and farms, and oh so much more. And not only does each level feel like its own thing, they're also all beautiful. This game still manages to look great over 10 years after its original release. A bit of a brief tangent, but the first time I played Alan Wake was on a crappy 2009 Toshiba laptop. It should not have been running the game, but I wanted to play it so bad that I went through it lagging like crazy. But I distinctly remember all of the water textures in the game were broken. The water was blindingly bright, but I still played it and I never even realized just how good the game could look until years later when I finally had an actual computer good enough to run the game. So even without the great graphics, it's a good game. But the graphics are good though, and still hold up, so I can't wait to see what they do with the remaster. Next, there's the matter of the game's atmosphere. A horror game is defined by having a good atmosphere, and Alan Wake excels at it. The use of eerie visuals and creative sound design keeps the game feeling tense, even when there may not be anything going on. You always feel like at any moment enemies could pop out and scare you, and sometimes they do. But just the sheer beauty of the game with the brooding atmosphere really brings it to new levels. And of course, I can't forget to mention Alan Wake's incredible voice actor, Matthew Peretta. I can't imagine any other actor playing this character. So much of the game is his storytelling and narration, and he really carries a lot of the game on his back. He's also incredible in Control as Dr. Casper Darling. He just always does a really good job. God, I love that man. Most of the game is walking through the various levels, waiting for enemies to pop out and attack you, but don't worry, there are some ways to predict when enemies will show up. Throughout the game, you collect pages of Alan Wake's unwritten manuscript, The Departure, which tells of the events of the game that are about to happen, such as an axe-wielding psycho or a possessed ranger showing up to try and ruin your day. Although Alan's day has been pretty terrible if we're being honest, so I don't know if the enemies make it much worse, but that's besides the point. These manuscript pages can be found everywhere throughout the game. Some are on the main path, some are hidden, and others are only available if you're playing on Nightmare difficulty, the game's hardest mode. They all serve to build the world of the game, but also to help Alan on his journey. Those manuscript pages aren't required, but they are a fun collectible to grab, and speaking of collectibles, there are a lot of them in this game. Besides the manuscript, there are coffee thermoses to collect, TV shows to watch, radio shows to listen to, and of course, pyramids of cans that you can shoot over. Literally none of these things are required though, so don't stress about it, but they are little fun things that you can do. Speaking of fun things, Alan Wake actually features my favorite moment in all of video game history. 5 words, Children of the Elder God. If you've never played this game, I'm sorry there are about to be some spoilers, but I gotta talk about this. In episode 4, you reach the farm of the Old Gods of Asgard, the local metal group, and you have to fight your way to their main house. This requires some puzzles and some basic combat, but along the way you face off against a horde of Taken in a gauntlet, all set to the epic song Children of the Elder God, while fireworks go off and you shoot down all of your enemies. No other game has made me feel like such a badass, and sometimes I'll even go back and just replay that specific chapter for this one moment. It is completely worth it every single time. But there's still a big burning question. Why is this game so fondly remembered? And in the wake of a remaster, why is it worth revisiting? Besides its cult status, this is the perfect game for fans of Stephen King or shows like Twin Peaks or The Twilight Zone. It takes the extremely distinct vibe of those things and meshes it perfectly into a game form. So from that perspective, it's no wonder the game has such a cult following today. But I think there's so much more to admire about the game. The first thing that makes Alan Wake so remarkable and worthy of a remaster is that in a genre that is so saturated by certain topics, Alan Wake manages to tell a completely original and enthralling story that will leave players on the edge of their seat. To this day, no game has told a story that has captured me quite like Alan Wake. The closest is another Remedy game, Control, so really, Remedy just kills it on the story front. Next, there's the fact that this game not only begins an entire extended universe, play Control, it also serves as the building blocks for everything that Remedy has done since. The gameplay, the storytelling, just the general atmosphere, all can be seen in Alan Wake, and it gives the unique perspective of how these ideas have morphed and grown over the years into their own thing. And finally, there's the fact, and I admit this is a bit selfish, but if this remaster sells well, we may just get an Alan Wake 2, and that's something that I've been hoping for years, so I won't let y'all ruin this for me. Go play Alan Wake. Quite honestly, Alan Wake is the kind of game you need to play at least once in your life. Some people don't like horror games. Well, trust me, you will like this game. Some people don't like action games. Well, trust me, you will like this game. There are so many great things I can say about Alan Wake, and even though it has a cult following, I think so many more people need to play it. So whether you play the original release or wait for the remaster to come, either way, Alan Wake is a one-of-a-kind gaming experience that needs to be experienced. So just get out there and play the dang game. It'll only set you back at like 15 hours at most, so what have you got to lose? Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you saw, well, first off, go play Alan Wake, but then come back and subscribe for more videos just like this one. Also, let me know in the comments if there are any games that you would like to see me talk about in the future. I also stream over at Twitch pretty often, so you can find me over there at twitch.tv/triceratops_junior. Okay, y'all. Peace out. I'll catch you on the flip side.